Elizabeth Gertrude Stern, born in 1890 in a Jewish ghetto in a large Midwestern town, and growing up to obey her father's commandments.
I remember looking down at the face of my father, beautiful and still in death, and for a brief moment feeling my heart rise up. Surely it was in a strange, suffocating relief. Now I am free.
What do we do with the baby? What do we do with the baby? What do we do with the baby? Oh.
Elizabeth Cady Stanton, born in New York State in 1815, the same year her father was elected to Congress.
For those of us who wash and iron, bake and brew, carry water and fat babies upstairs and down, the drapery of a whalebone bodice and a bedraggled skirt is quite too much. One might as well work with a ball and chain. It's being born a woman so criminal an offense that we must be doomed to this everlasting bondage.
Rose, rose, and up she rises. Rose, rose, and up she rises. Rose, rose, and up she rises early in the morning.
Maria Mitchell, born on Nantucket Island in 1818. Her father was devoted to astronomy, and all of the children were drafted into counting seconds by the chronometer during his observations.
Once a lady asked me if I told fortunes. When I replied in the negative, she asked me if I weren't an astronomer. I admitted I made efforts in that direction. She then asked me, what could I tell if not fortunes? I told her I could tell when the moon would rise and when the sun would set. She said, oh, in a tone that plainly implied, is that all?
My horses ain't hungry, they won't eat your hay, so I'll get on my pony, I'm going away.
Anna Howard Shaw, at age 12, moved from a manufacturing town in Massachusetts to the wild woods of Michigan in 1859.
With all our belongings, we'll ride till we come to a lonely little cabin, we'll call it our home.
Once when I was 14, I'd been in the woods all day buried in my books, and when I returned home at night, still in the dream these books had opened to me, Father was awaiting my coming dark with disapproval. I was an idler who wasted time. He ended a long arraignment by predicting that with such tendencies, I would make nothing of my life.
Old Molly Hare, what you doing there? Riding through the cotton patch as fast as I can tear.
Mary Harris Jones, born in 1830, lived to be 100 years old and was known to children and adults alike as Mother Jones.
I asked a man in prison once how he happened to be there, and he said he'd stolen a pair of shoes, and I told him if he'd stolen a railroad, he'd be a United States Senator.
When I was a young maid, when I was a young maid, then, oh, then.
Eliza Southgate, born in 1793 in Scarborough, Maine, sent by her parents to finishing school near Boston when she was 14.
This way, that way, then.
You may justly say, my best of parents, that every letter of mine is one which is asking for something more. If you refuse me, I know you do what you think best, and I ought not to complain, for you have never yet refused me anything, my best of parents. How shall I repay you?
I was up before 6, made the fire in the kitchen and made coffee. Then I set the table in the dining room and made the fire there. Toasted the bread, trimmed the lamps, rang the breakfast bell at 7. After breakfast, I made my bed and put up the room. Then I went down to the library to look over my comet computations till noon. I'm just beginning to notice the different colors of the stars. I wonder I have so long been insensible to this charm in the skies. The tints of the different stars are so delicate in their variety. Before dinner, I did some tatting. I made 7 buttonholes for Kay. I dressed and then dined.
The first event engraved on my memory was the birth of a sister when I was 4 years old. I heard so many friends remark, what a pity it is she is a girl. I felt a kind of compassion for the little baby. true, our family consisted of 5 girls, only 1 boy, but I did not understand then that girls were considered an inferior order of beings.
When my father took up his claim of 360 acres of land in the wilderness of northern Michigan and sent my mother and 5 young children to live there alone until he could join us, he gave no thought to the matter in which we were to make the struggle and survive the hardships before us. From his viewpoint, he was doing a man's duty. He'd furnished us with land in the 4 walls of a log cabin. Someday, he reasoned, the place would become a fine estate which his sons would inherit and in the course of time pass on to their sons. But to the present, we were 100 miles from the railroad, 40 miles from the nearest post office, half a dozen miles from any neighbors save Indians, wolves, and wildcats. We were wholly unlearned in the ways of the woods, yet we faced our situation with clear and unalarmed eyes the morning after our arrival. We held a family council after breakfast, and in this, though I was only 12, I took an eager and determined part. I loved work. It's always been my favorite form of recreation, and my spirit rose to the opportunities of it, which smiled on us from every side. You see, I knew I was doing my share for the family, and already, too, I'd begun to feel the call of my career. For some reason, I wanted to preach, to talk to people, to tell them things. Just why, just what, I did not yet know, but I'd begun to preach in the silent woods, to stand upon tree stumps and address the unresponsive trees, to feel the stir of aspiration within me. Someday, I'm going to college, and before I die, I shall be worth $10,000.
The first clear impression of my childhood is a summer day. My mother, in her puffed sleeves and tight-fitted dress, walked near my father in his long coat and tall hat, for he was assistant to the rabbi in our city. We children trudged behind. We came at last to the river's edge. My father stood, waited a moment, and then prayed that his sins should be washed away by the river. I looked into the muddy waters below us and at my father. All my life I believed that, even when I resisted him, he was right. But today it seemed to me childish and perhaps even silly to be standing there praying that our sins should be washed away by the river. Most of the people who live near us were Catholic. They believed that if you told the priest what you had done, you would not be punished for your misdeeds. When I told my father of the Catholics, he looked down at me from his tall height and said, "You can see how foolish and childish, ignorant people are. A priest tells them that if they go to him and confess, he can forgive them. Can a sin be undone by a confession?" And yet here was my father, grave and pleading, sending our own sins down the waters of the Ohio. I looked at him, opened my mouth, but did not speak. I knew he would be angry. From that day, however, I did not accept anything he told me about our faith until I had analyzed it myself.
My husband was an iron molder and a staunch member of the Iron Molders Union, and we were living in Memphis. And the yellow fever epidemic swept the city. Its victims were mainly the poor and the workers. The rich and the well-to-do fled the city, and the schools and churches were closed. People were not permitted in the house where there was a yellow fever victim. And the poor could not afford nurses. Across the street from me, there were 10 persons lay dead from the plague. The dead surrounded us, and they came at night to bury them quickly and without ceremony. And all about my house, I heard weeping and cries of delirium. And one by one, my 4 little children sickened and died. And I washed them Their little bodies. Their little bodies, I got them ready for burial. And my husband caught the fever and died. And I sat through nights of grief, and no one came, and no one could. Other homes were as stricken as mine. I heard the grating of the wheels of the death cart all day long, all night long. And after the union had buried my husband, I got a permit to nurse the sufferers. And that I did until the plague was stamped out. And I returned to Chicago. And I went back into the dressmaking business. And I became more and more engrossed in the labor struggle. And I decided to take an active part in the efforts of the people to better the conditions under which they worked and lived. And I became a member of the Knights of Labor. And from that time on, I became wholly engrossed in the labor movement.
Dearest Mother, I received your packet of things of the 20th and was very glad of them. Never did I know the worth of good parents half so much as now I am from them. Now, what do you think I'm going to ask you for? A wig. Eleanor Coffin has got a new one. It's just like my hair, and it's only $5. I must either cut my hair or have one. I cannot dress it at all stylish. And how much time it will save. In 1 year's time, we could save it in pins and papers. At the assembly, I was quite ashamed of my head, for nobody has long hair. If you will consent to my having one, do send me a $5 bill by the post immediately after you receive this. I am in hopes to have it for the next assembly.
When I was 11 years old, my only brother, who had just graduated from Union College, came home to die. A young man of great talent and promise. He was the pride of my father's heart. I recall going in to the large, darkened parlor and finding the casket and the mirrors and the pictures all draped in white. And my father seated, pale and immovable. As he took no notice of me, after standing a long while, I climbed upon his knee when he mechanically put his arm about me. And with my head resting against his beating heart, we both sat there in silence. He thinking of the wreck of all his hopes in the loss of a dear son, and I wondering what could be said or done to fill the void in his breast. At last he heaved a deep sigh. "Oh, my daughter, I wish you were a boy." Throwing my arms about his neck, I replied, "I will try to be all that my brother was." All that day and far into the night, I pondered the problems of boyhood. I thought that the chief thing to be done in order to equal boys was to be learned and courageous. So I decided to study Greek and learn to manage a horse. I learned to leap a fence on horseback. I studied Latin, Greek, and mathematics with a class of boys at the academy, many of whom were much older than I. For 3 years, one boy kept his place at the head of the class. I always stood next. 2 prizes were offered in Greek, I strove for one and took the second. One thought alone filled my mind. Now my father will be satisfied with me. I rushed into his office, placed the New Greek Testament, which was my prize, on his table, and exclaimed, "I got it." He picked up the book and asked me some questions about the class. And evidently pleased, he handed it back to me. And then he kissed me on the forehead and exclaimed with a sigh, "You should have been a boy."
I thank heaven I was born a woman. As a woman, I have now only patiently to wait until some clever fellow shall take a fancy to me and place me in a situation. I am determined to make the best of it. Let it be what it will. We ladies, you know, possess that sweet pliability of temper. But remember, I desire to be thankful I am not a man. Were I a man, I would not be content with mediocrity in anything. But as a woman, I am equal to the generality of my sex. And I do not feel that great desire for fame I think I should if I was a man. Were I a man, the law would be my choice. When I might hope to arrive at an eminence which would be gratifying to my feelings, I should then hope to be a public character, respected and admired. To be an eloquent speaker would be the delight of my heart.
As an aid to public speaking, I was taught to elocute, and I remember in every mournful detail the occasion on which I gave my first recitation. We were having our monthly public exhibition night, and the audience included not only my classmates, but their parents and friends as well. The selection I intended to recite was a poem entitled "No Sets in Heaven." But when I faced my audience, I was so appalled by its size and by the sudden realization of my own temerity that I fainted during the recitation of the first verse. Sympathetic classmates carried me into an anteroom and revived me, after which they naturally assumed that the entertainment I furnished was over for the evening. I, however, felt that if I let that failure stand against me, I could never afterwards speak in public. And within 10 minutes, notwithstanding the protests of my friends, I was back in the hall, beginning my recitation a second time. The audience gave me its eager attention. Possibly they hoped to see me topple off the platform again, but nothing of the sort occurred. I went through my recitation with self-possession, and even received some friendly applause at the end.
My father did not approve of my continuing high school. It was time for me to think of marrying a pious young man. He and my mother disagreed about it. Their one quarrel. Perhaps it was due to my going to high school, my mother said gently and dubiously, that I wanted something new. I wanted to dance, to play, to have fun. I don't want to go to work at 14 or 15, get married at 16, be a mother at 18, and an old woman at 30. My mother drew her fine, dark brows together. She took my face in her little hands, round and soft in spite of their constant work. You shall learn to dance, my daughter. And dance I did. dreadful public dance hall, for I paid a quarter there once every Wednesday night and danced with the lady instructor whenever she thought of me. But I faithfully put my foot out, 1, 2, 3, and turn, as the long line of men and women learn the steps of the waltz. I learned a two-step and a schottisch, and even, wild days those, to do the barn dance. I wanted a new thing, happiness.
I swept the sky 2 hours last night. Not a fringe of cloud, all clear, all beautiful. I really enjoy that kind of work. But my back soon becomes tired, long before the cold chills me. But I saw 2 nebulae in Leo with which I was not familiar. And that repaid me for my time.
When I married Mr. Stanton, he announced to me that his business would occupy all his time, that I must take complete charge of the housekeeping. It's a proud moment in a woman's life to reign supreme within 4 walls. I studied up everything pertaining to housekeeping. Even washing day had its charms for me. The clean clothes on the line, on the grass, they looked so white. They smelled so sweet. I inspired my laundress with an ambition to get the clothes out earlier than the neighbors, to have them ironed, put away sooner. I felt the same ambition to excel in all departments of the household arts, just as I had done at school in the different branches of learning. My love of order and cleanliness was carried throughout, from parlor to kitchen, from front door to back. I even paid the man an extra shilling if he'd pile the logs of firewood with their smooth ends outward.
I went to work in a settlement house and became assistant to the chief of staff, Dr. Morton. One day he turned to me and said, "Perhaps you've heard that I've been asked to take charge of another project." It did not seem strange to me when he asked me to go with him and to be his wife. I'd known for months that I loved him. He said I must do anything I wanted to do, just as he did what he chose. Only he must earn our living. Whatever I did, I could do without thinking whether it was successful or not, only whether it made me happy. I took his hands in mine. I kissed him. But as I did, I know I wished he had said that my work was as practical a need to me as his. He thought I might do social work as a volunteer without pay. I was, however, determined not to be an amateur. I needed to work just as he did. I would not be happy otherwise. "So, you want a career," he said, "and a husband tacked on. Haven't you one, with me tacked on?" He kissed me then and smiled very tenderly indeed. "I like to work," I then said quietly. "I enjoy being important." He laughed then, relieved. He was delighted that I spoke like a child about my work. He kissed me and held me close.
Put some new wires into my telescope this morning. I so dreaded it when I found out yesterday that it must be done that it disturbed my sleep. It was much easier than I'd expected. Took out those little collimating screws first, then I drew out the tube, and in that I found the brass plate which contained the lines. I was at first a little puzzled as to which screws held this in its place, and as I was very anxious not to unscrew the wrong ones, I took time to consider and found I need turn only 2. Then out slipped the little plate with its 3 wires where 5 should have been, 2 having been broken. Used the hairs from my own head. Taking time to pick out the white ones, because I have no dark ones to spare.
I organized an army of women housekeepers on a given day. They were to bring mops and brooms and get ready to scare the scabs out of the mines. Well, the general manager and the sheriff and the corporation hirelings heard of the plan, and they were on hand. And the day came, and the women came with their mops and brooms, and I decided not to go to the drip mouth up at the mines, for I knew I'd be arrested and it might rout the army. So I selected as leader an Irish woman with a most picturesque appearance. She slept late, and her husband said, "Hurry if you wish to get into the army." And she grabbed a red petticoat and put it on over her long, thick cotton nightgown. And she had on a black stocking and a white stocking and a little red fringe shawl tied over her wild red hair. And her face was red and her eyes were mad. And I looked and I felt she could raise a rumpus. And I said, "You! Lead the army up to the drip mouth and take that dishpan you have in your hand and the hammer, and when the mules and the scabs come up from the mines, begin to hammer and holler, and all of you hammer and holler, and be ready with your mops and brooms to chase the scabs out of the mines, and don't be afraid of anyone." And up the mountainside, she yelling and hollering led the women. And when the mules and the scabs come up from the mines of the coals, she began to hammer on a dishpan and holler, and all the army of women joined in. The sheriff, he tapped her on the shoulder. He says, "Remember the mules. Don't frighten the mules." She said, took the little old tin pan, and she said, "To hell with you and the mules," and she hit him over the head and he dropped into the creek. And in a little shack nearby, a pal parrot said, "You got hell, did you? You got hell." Oh, and the mules began to rebel against the scabbers, and they kicked, and they bucked, and they chased the scab drivers down the hill, and off they went into the barn. From that day on, the women kept constant watch over the mines, that the companies would not bring in the scabs with their mops and brooms in one hand and their babies in the other arm, wrapped in little blankets. And there was no bloodshed, no riots. And the victory was due to the army of women with their mops and their brooms.
Among the many gentlemen with whom I've become acquainted and who have been attentive, one I believe is serious. I know not how to introduce this subject, yet, as I fear you may hear it from others and become anxious for my welfare, I feel it is my duty to tell you all. I felt cautious of encouraging his attentions, for I did not wish to discourage them. He's a man of business, uniform in his conduct, and very much respected. He is a man in whom I could place the most unbounded confidence. Nothing rash or impetuous in his disposition, but weighs maturely every circumstance. He appeared as solicitous that I should act with strict propriety as one of my most disinterested friends. He advises me like a friend, and would discourage his addresses until he had an opportunity of making known to my parents his character and wishes. This I promised. He insisted upon coming on immediately. This I refused to consent to. He is coming in October. And now, my dearest mother, I submit myself wholly to the wishes of my father and you, convinced that my happiness is your warmest wish, and to promote it has ever been your study. That I am deeply interested in Mr. Bown, I candidly acknowledge. He is a firm, steady, serious man. There is nothing light or trifling in his character.
And now I'm determined to have my own way, and I'm going to be married next Monday morning.
Here we are, at Mrs. Carter's boarding house. And though we have endeavored to keep ourselves as much out of the way as possible, a great many people have called to pay their respects to Mr. and Mrs. Bown. When I hear an old acquaintance call me Mrs. Bown, it really makes me stare. At first, it sounds so very odd. I'm enraptured with New York. You cannot imagine anything half so beautiful as Broadway. Mr. Bown brings me a pocket full of fruit every day he comes home. I eat as many as I want, and I'm thinking how much I would give to get them to you. But this early fruit won't keep it all. As to news, New York is not so gay as last winter. Few balls, but a great many tea parties. And the city air has not yet stolen my country bloom. For everyone says, I need not ask how you do, Mrs. Bown. You look in such fine health.
My second son was born. And the third. We moved from Boston to Seneca Falls, where our residence was on the outskirts of town. Roads very often muddy. No sidewalks most of the way. Mr. Stanton was frequently away from home. And a fourth son was born. I have so much care with all these boys on my hand. How I long to be free from housekeeping and children so as to have some time to read and think and write. The discontent I feel as wife, mother, housekeeper, physician, and spiritual guide, and the wearied, anxious look of the majority of women lead me to believe that some active measure must be taken to remedy the wrongs of society in general, and women in particular.
I thought it nice ladylike work to manage such slight threads and turn such delicate screws. Fine as are the hairs on one's head, I shall seek something finer. But I can see how clumsy they will appear when I get on with the eyepiece and magnify their imperfections. They look parallel to the eye, but with magnifying power, a very little crook will seem like a billowy wave, and a faint star will hide itself in the yawning abysses. I remembered at once that I had seen 2 cocoons in the library, which I carefully refrained from disturbing. I found them perfect and unrolled them. I made the wires of spiders' webs, breaking them and doing the work over again a great many times.
During the influenza epidemic of 1917, my husband came down with a sickness. We already had 2 children. I knew I must find work. Not now work to fill the time or to express myself, but to earn the living of my family. What could I do? I went to work in a department store. I learned to adjust things a bit. I prepared breakfast the night before. I taught my young daughter how to feed her little brother. I arranged for my children to have lunches with a woman who lived near the school. Sometimes I would run out to my home, missing my own lunch, but having the peace of knowing that everything went well with my husband. He was tired and lonely, but he said nothing. He would sit, waiting till the children came home. After months, I was promoted to the position of personnel director. I was a woman with a career for certain now. I was successful. I was as successful as a man. I was shown to my own office, a pretty little thing with a real desk and a telephone and a tray. What for? Oh, for business letters. It looked just like the tray in which I drained dishes.
The first notice of me ever printed in the newspaper. This was instigated by my brother-in-law and was brief but pointed. It read, "A young girl named Anna Shaw preached her first sermon at Ashton yesterday. Her real friends deprecate the course she is pursuing." The members of my family, meeting in solemn conclave, sent for me. They had a proposition to make. If I would give up my preaching, they would send me to college and pay for the entire course. We had a long evening together, and it was a very unhappy one. At the end of it, I was given 24 hours in which to decide whether I would choose my people and college or my pulpit and the Arctic loneliness of a life that held no family circle. It did not take me 24 hours of reflection to convince me that I must go my solitary way.
You are anxious, my dear mother, to hear how I am. I have a new physician to attend me. He keeps me on a milk diet, but allows me to eat eggs and oysters. I'm much better already. My cough seems to be my only disorder. He thinks he can cure that. Indeed, he speaks with perfect confidence and says that he is sure that as soon as I leave this severe New York winter and get to warmer weather in South Carolina, my cough will soon leave me. You will hear from me often. It's just that at present my mind seems so occupied, leaving my children, preparing to go, making arrangements to shut up my house. 'Tis quite a trial to leave my little ones. My little Mary has a wet nurse. She's a fine, lively child. Adieu. I did not think I could have spoken half so much. Love to all my friends.
I at length got all the wires in. Crossing the 5 perpendicular with the horizontal one. After 24 hours, exposure to the weather, I looked at them. The spider's webs had not changed. They were plainly used to a chill and made to endure changes of temperature.
My husband got well enough to go back to work again. I was happy that day because he was head of our life and of our home. That was something I yielded to him as I gave my love to him. I left the store. Women wrote to ask me to join clubs interested in women's points of view. Once I gave a lecture on the right of the girl child to her own personality. Yet I was happy to lose mine in my husband's. My children did not need me. I was 38, and I was doing nothing. I was fretting at the long days, bored with the long nights. I went to my desk. And there, like an old friend, stood my old typewriter. I had bought it in installments for $20. It seemed to me my fingers burned with the need to write all the things I had lived and seen. I went to see a magazine editor. We spoke, and I found that all the years of my work were a mine on which I could draw. I received a first assignment, then a second. I found other editors. At the end of the first year, I had earned almost $3,000. It seemed criminal to have been so successful, for I was so happy in my work and in my home.
My fifth child is a girl. The particulars I must give you. On Wednesday morning at 6, I awoke with a little pain, which I well understood. Thereupon I jumped up, bathed, dressed myself, hurried breakfast, eating none myself, of course, got the house and all things in order, working bravely between the pains. I neither sat down nor lay down until 9:30, at which point I gave up all my vocations and avocations, both secular and domestic, and devoted myself wholly to the one matter then brought before my mind. At 10 o'clock, the whole work was completed. The nurse and Amelia, our housekeeper, alone officiating. I had no doctor, and Mr. Stanton was away on business. When the baby was 24 hours old, I got up, bathed, making a sponge and sitz bath, applied my wet bandage, dressed myself, ate my breakfast, walked on the piazza, and the day being beautiful, I took a ride of 3 miles on the old plank road. I came home, I rested for an hour or so, read the newspapers, and I wrote a long letter to Mama. My joy at being the mother of a precious little girl is more than I can tell you.
I went to Kensington, Pennsylvania, and 75,000 textile workers were on strike. And more than 10,000 of them little children. And they were all stooped, the little things, rounded shoulders and skinny. And some of them with their fingers off to the knuckles, and them not 10 years of age. Well, I asked the newspaper men, why haven't you publicized the child labor problems here in Pennsylvania? And they said, well, the 10 mill owners have stuck in the newspapers, and we couldn't. Well, I've got stuck. I've got stuck in these little children, and I'll arrange some publicity. And I decided to take the little children on a tour. So we'd have attention from the nation about the child labor problem. And we marched. And they were happy. They had plenty to eat. And they bathed every day in the streams and the rivers. And I looked at them, I thought, when this is over, and they're back in the mills, they'll never have another holiday like this one. And we marched from Princeton to Jersey City to Hoboken and into New York. And when we got to Coney Island, after the wild animal show, I told the boys, get into the empty cages and hold on to the bars and I'll talk. And I said, see those monkeys in the cages there? The professors are trying to teach them to speak. They're too smart, those monkeys. They're afraid the manufacturers will buy them as slaves for the factories. And you see those little boys in the cages there? We're told that every American boy has a chance to be president. Well, I tell you, those little boys would give up the chance to be president for square meals and a chance to play.
When the train comes along, when the train comes along,
I send a little pair of shoes for Mary, a little cuckoo toy for Walter, and a tumbler of orange marmalade. I have had only one letter from New York since I have been here. Not one line from my husband. I have nothing flattering to say of my health. I'm very miserable at present. How are my dear little ones? Not too troublesome, I hope. I hardly trust myself to think of them. Precious children, how they bind me to life. Adieu. I have a bad headache and I'm low-spirited today.
If my father asks for me, tell him death doth summon me.
Sacred to the memory of Eliza Southgate Bowen, wife of Walter Bowen of New York, daughter of Robert Southgate, Esquire of Scarborough, District of Maine, who departed this life on the 19th day of February, aged 25 years.
A few evenings ago, a meteor flashed upon me suddenly. Very bright, very beautiful, very short-lived. It seemed to me that it was sent just for me especially, because it greeted me the instant I looked up and was gone in a second. Beautiful, fleeting. I am but a woman. Well, for women, there are undoubtedly a great many difficulties in the path, but all the more to overcome. First, one should not say, I am but a woman, but a woman. What more can you ask to be?
The stagecoach took me within 22 miles of my destination. To my dismay, however, when I arrived Saturday evening, I found that the rest of the journey lay through a dense woods, and that I could reach my pulpit in time the next morning only by having someone drive me through the woods at night. It was not a pleasant prospect, for I'd heard appalling tales of the stockades in this region and of the women who were kept prisoners there. But to miss the engagement was not to be thought of. And when, after several vain efforts to find a driver, a man appeared in a two-seated wagon and offered to take me to my destination, I felt that I had to go with him. Though I did not like his appearance, he was a huge, muscular person with a protruding jaw and a singularly evasive eye, but I reflected that his forbidding expression might be due, in part at least, to the prospect of the long night drive through the woods, to which possibly he objected as much as I did. It was already growing dark when we started, and within a few moments we were out of the settlement and entering the woods. With me, I had a revolver I'd long since learned to use, but which I very seldom carried. I'd hesitated to bring it now. I'd even left home without it, and then, impelled by some impulse I never afterwards ceased to bless, had returned home for it, dropped it in my handbag. I sat on the back seat of the wagon directly behind the driver, and for a while his great shoulders blotted out all perspective as he drove on in stolid silence. Soon the darkness folded around us like a garment. I could see neither the driver nor his horses, but could hear only the sibilant whisper of the trees and the creak of our slow wheels on the rough forest road. Suddenly the driver began to talk. And at first I was glad to hear the reassuring human tones, for the experience had begun to seem like a bad dream. I replied readily, and at once regretted that I had done so, for the man's choice of topics was most unpleasant. He began to tell me stories of the stockades. Grim stories with horrible details repeated so fully and with such gusto that I soon realized he was deliberately affronting my ears. I told him I could not listen to such talk. He replied with a series of oaths and shocking vulgarities, stopping his horses that he might turn and fling the words in my face. He ended by snarling I must think him a fool to imagine he did not know the kind of woman I was. What was I doing in the rough country, and why was I alone with him in the dark woods at night? I tried to answer him calmly. you know perfectly well who I am, and you understand that I am making this journey tonight because I'm to preach tomorrow morning, and there's no other way to keep my engagement. He uttered a laugh, which was a most unpleasant sound. Well, I'm damned if I'll take you. I've got you here. I'm going to keep you here. I slipped my hand into the satchel in my lap, and it touched my revolver. No touch of human fingers ever brought such comfort. With a deep breath of thanksgiving, I drew it out and cocked it. Here, what have you got there? I have a revolver, and it is cocked and aimed straight at your back. Now drive on. If you stop again or speak, I'll shoot you. For a moment or two, he blustered. By God, you wouldn't dare, wouldn't I? You'd try me by speaking just once more. Even as I spoke, I felt my hair rise on my scalp with the horror of the moment, which seemed worse than any nightmare a woman could experience. But the man was conquered by the knowledge of the waiting, willing weapon just behind him. He laid his whip savagely on the backs of his horses, and they responded with a leap that almost knocked me out of the wagon. He did not speak again, nor stop, yet I dared not relax my caution. Hour after hour crawled toward day, and still I sat in the unpierced darkness, the revolver ready. I knew he was inwardly raging, and that at any instant he might make a sudden jump and try to get the revolver away from me. I decided that at his slightest movement, I must shoot. But dawn came at last. And just as its bluish light touched the dark tips of the pines, we drove up to the log hotel in the settlement that was our destination. Here my driver spoke. Get down, he said. This is the place. I sat still. Even yet, I dared not trust him. Moreover, I was so stiff after my vigil, I was not sure I could move. You get down and wake up the landlord and bring him out here. He sullenly obeyed and aroused the hotel owner. And when the latter appeared, he climbed out of the wagon with some effort, but without explanation. That morning, I preached in my friend's pulpit as I had promised to do. And the rough building was packed with lumbermen who'd come in from the neighboring camp. Their appearance caused a great stir. There were 40 or 50 of them. And when we took up our collection, it was the largest that had ever been taken in the history of the settlement. But I soon learned that it wasn't the spiritual comfort that I offered which appealed to the men. My driver of the night before, who was one of their number, had told his pals of his experience, and the whole camp had poured into town to see the woman minister who carried a revolver. Her sermon, I overheard one of them say. I don't know what she preached, but you don't make no mistake about one thing. The little lady preacher has sure got grit.
We must make the voyage of life alone.
It matters not whether the solitary voyager be a man or a woman.
We come into the world alone, and like all who have gone before us, we leave it alone under circumstances peculiar to ourselves.
I send a little pair of shoes for Mary, a little cuckoo toy for Walter, and a tumbler of orange marmalade. Precious children, how they bind me to life.
If the 19th century is to be governed by the opinions of the 18th and the 20th by the 19th, then the world will always be governed by dead men. I would rather make a few slanders from a superabundance of life than to have all the proprieties of a well-embalmed mummy.
I was a woman with a career for certain now. I learned to adjust things a bit.
I was given 24 hours in which to decide whether I would choose my people or my pulpit. It did not take me 24 hours to convince me that I must go my solitary way.
Pray for the dead and fight like hell for the living.
But a woman, what more can you ask to be?
Such is individual life.
Who can take?
Dare take.
On himself.
Herself.
The rights, the responsibilities, the duties of another human soul.